So we're doing an axle reseal today on an 82 FJ40 Landcruiser. As you can tell, the axle seals have all blown on this thing. Is pretty typical. We've got leaking fluid and we're going to clean all that up and rebuild it. This gives you an idea of some of the tools we'll be using here today. This puller is going to be very handy getting those tie rod ends off. We're going to have a couple of large sockets to get axle nuts off. We're going to use a brass wire wheel, clean things up a bit, assortment of sockets, torque wrenches, and of course the seal kit and wheel bearings. The goal here is to actually remove the entire axle, get it out from underneath the truck so that we can get it all cleaned up, get it all rebuilt, and make it all look nice again. So that's what we're doing. First thing, we're going to need to get under here and disconnect the drive shaft from the differential. So that's what we'll do first. So we've got the differential unbolted from the drive shaft. Quick pro tip: if you take out your drive shaft and when you put it back in later, you want to make sure your yokes are in phase front to back. So what that means is if you drew a straight line from the front, that U-joint would match up in the back. If you don't do that, whenever you put it back in, you're going to get some vibration you don't want. Next up, I'm going to go ahead and drain the differential, get all the fluid out of here. And that is done by removing this drain bolt. And that is a 24 millimeter. Next up is disconnecting the brake line from the differential. I'm not going to take all of these brake lines off right now. I'll wait until I get it out from under the truck. But I can disconnect that right there. It's a good thing I was in there pulling this brake line, because look what I found. Got a nice kink in the braided steel brake line, where it looks like it was cut and just about ready to start leaking. Not what you want for your front brakes. Next up, we're going to take off this tie rod end so we can disconnect it from the axle. So we didn't catch the pop on camera, but this is how you use this tie rod puller. You just get the bracket around where it mounts, and you just tighten this down and it pushes it out for you. Make sure when you reinstall it, use the castle nut and a cotter pin. Next up, we're going to go ahead and disconnect this shock right there at that bolt. Now that we're up on blocks, we can take out these U-bolts. There's 2 on each side, and this is a 22 millimeter nut that we're going to be taking off of here. Alright, now that we got the leaf spring hangers off of there, we can move to the front of the leaf spring. Take off that bottom bolt, and then we should be able to just swing that spring out of the way and roll this thing right out of here. After much persuasion, we got the leaf springs dropped, took out the shackles, and that allowed the front end of these leaves to drop down. Now we're going to wheel out the axle. Now that we have the axle out, you can see just how leaky this thing is. We've got all kinds of buildup back here. Probably a decade's worth, if not more. And through the magic of editing, you don't have to sit here and watch me wire wheel this for 5 hours and then paint it, which we have now done. I know it's not perfect, but hey, we're not going for concourse here. Alright, now to get to the actual knuckle rebuild. We've got to take off the wheel, and then our first step is to disconnect the hub. We've got 6 10 millimeter bolts that hold this in and then just pull straight out. And then we've got 6 12 millimeter bolts. They're going to hold on the hub housing. Take those off next. Each one of these studs has a nut and a lock washer, as well as these cone washers. These cone washers are recessed inside of here, and you can't get it off until you take those out. Now these cone washers can get stuck in here pretty good, so if you can find a brass punch, you can hit the end of this stud and it loosens them up so you can get them out. The last thing to get this hub off is that snap ring right there. We've got a snap ring that's around the axle and it's holding that in. We'll take that off, then we can take the outer hub off. Snap ring. So you'll notice that there is a gasket that goes between the hub and the outer hub and the inner hub. Take this off, replacing. See how brittle it is. And then we've got a couple of nuts here. We've got a outer nut that is going to have a specific torque spec to it. I believe it's 58 pounds or so. We've got a locking washer right in between it, and then another nut behind that. That's the adjusting nut. Ultimately, we're going to be looking for around 5 to 7 or 8 pounds of drag on the actual hub bearing. And that's where you adjust it, is with this nut that's in the back. I'll show you that in a second. So now that we got this nut loosened up, see what all we're working with here. Again, this is the locking nut that will lock into place after you've got your adjustment set properly. And then we've got a lock washer. And one thing I noticed about whoever was in here last, they bent all the tabs to lock the outer nut, but I like to typically do a couple of tabs to lock the outer nut and then push a couple of the tabs back to lock the adjusting nut. Just personal preference probably. And then this one is the adjusting nut. Typically it's only about hand tight. This one's a little bit tighter than that. Once we've got the adjusting nut off, set it aside. And then we've got one more washer back here that just holds the hub bearing in place and sets that tension so that you can adjust your drag. Now before we can remove the hub bearing and the rotor, we've got to take off the caliper. And the quickest way to do that is to remove these two 17mm bolts. There's one of them up here and one of them down here. And that'll let us get the caliper off the knuckle. The other piece I'll probably need to disconnect is going to be our 10mm brake fitting. I'm going to run that hard brake line, disconnect it right there. Then that'll let me take the whole caliper off. Alright, remove the two caliper bolts and disconnected that 10mm fitting, so now we can just go ahead and pull this hub straight off now. So there's that thrust washer we were talking about. See, that's lined up with this notch on the top of the spindle, and then behind that is the actual bearing, the outer hub bearing. Pull this out of here. You can see the outer hub bearing comes out. And then the rest of the hub bearing assembly just removed from the spindle. Here's a view of that rotor on the back side. You can see where the seal is just completely blown out. And then just inside is the inner hub bearing, which you'll get a better view of this when we're putting it all back together. As we take off this dust shield, I'm going to note the orientation of these brackets and various seals that are in here. So we're going to take that one off. This one should come off of here. That's going to leave us with the knuckle. And the spindle should just come right off. Alright, so we're down to the axle and the knuckle. And if you look, you'll notice somebody before me used high temp grease instead of regular moly grease. So we'll clean that up and fix that. This axle's got to be in just the right orientation to come out of here. Find the right spot. And we can just pull it straight out. Next up is removing the castle nut from this tie rod end and then popping that loose. Then we're going to take off these nuts. There's some cone washers underneath these as well. and then that'll allow us to separate that from the knuckle, which ultimately gets us into accessing the bearings and pulling the knuckle off. See if we can get the pop this time. I did it. These nuts are just going to come off of here. We've got, again, a set of lock washers underneath and a set of cone washers. We're going to use that same brass punch or drift to tap the top of these to get those cone washers to come loose. So we got the cone washers out of there and the nuts off, so we're about to take off this steering arm. You're going to be cleaning up all this grease. Got to throw it in some degreaser, let it sit for a little while, makes it way easier to get cleaned up, and ultimately we'll get it repainted. But there's a product over at the Dollar General. This LA is totally awesome. Not sponsored, but it is totally awesome at getting this stuff all cleaned up. See what I did there? You can tell them to sponsor me. With that steering arm out of the way, you can get a peek into this upper bearing. There's a bearing on top and another one on the bottom. We'll do the same thing, taking out those nuts and washers, and then we can take the knuckle off of the axle. One other point to mention, there are shims on both the top and bottom, and these shims set your preload. Depending on how many shims you put in here, it'll make it either tighter or looser to move this back and forth, and we'll use a scale to get it in spec because you don't want it to be too loose, but you don't want it to be too tight either. The kit that we got came with a new set of shims, so we can find something similar to what was on there, and we'll probably be pretty close. Now we got the top and bottom plates off of this knuckle. The last thing we're gonna have to do is come around the back side, remove these bolts, 6 of them, and get the seals off the back side of the knuckle. There's gonna be a metal plate, then there's gonna be a felt seal, a rubber seal, and then a metal ring in that order from the outside in. Yeah, so there it is. I said 6 a second ago. There's 8 of those 10mm bolts that hold this in, but you can see how all these layers come together. So you've got this outer bracket that holds on a felt seal, a rubber seal, which clearly failed, and then there is a metal ring that goes in here. And you'll see all that during the reassembly. With that disconnected, we can just take this knuckle, push up on the bearing in the bottom, and that allows us to just pull this knuckle off of here. And so the last couple things we're going to have to do before we reassemble is we're going to have to take out the race for these bearings. There's a race on the top and the bottom. You'll notice there's some notches inside the knuckle or inside the axle that are going to be give you access to hit the back side of the race with a punch, and that'll let you knock it out. You just rotate from one side to the other, and then do the same thing on the back side of this upper race. And then we're going to go in and change this axle seal. Looks like, again, whoever was in here last put it in backwards, so we'll correct that while we're in here too. Right here is about where you put that punch. You got a groove right there that it fits into, and you just punch either side, and after a couple of taparoos, the thing just comes right out. So we've got a new race. Whenever you replace bearings, you want to use the new race that comes with the bearings rather than reusing the old ones. These each of these races are machine specific to the bearing that they're paired with, and so you run a little bit of a risk of it being just slightly out of shape if you reuse a race. Now, it's not impossible to reuse it, or it's not critical to avoid reusing them, but it's best not to. So we're going back in with Koyo bearings all the way around. From all the research I've done, Koyo is the brand to use. These are Japanese manufactured bearings. They're going to do the upper and lower axle bearings, as well as the inner and outer wheel bearings, and they're all going to be Koyo. Replacing the race on these is pretty simple. Some people like to freeze them so they go in a little easier, but regardless, I like to use the old race as the one that came out of it. I just set it on top with this thicker lip right there, and then I can use the hammer or a piece of wood and a hammer to knock that into place. So we'll do that for the top and bottom. Races are in, both top and bottom. Next step is that axle seal. And we got the old one out. That's this one here. And this is the new one. As you recall, this one was in backwards. So when we put the new one in, we'll put it in with the spring facing the fluid. So it'll go like that. And similar to the races, put in a little bit of grease on the outside of it, just so it'll slide in a little easier. So with my conglomeration of adapters and extensions here, I can use the perfectly sized backside of this socket to go onto the oil seal and drive the extension so that we get an even pressure onto that oil seal so it goes into the axle. And just like that, a few taps later, you've got your oil seal in the axle. Want to be careful with it so that it doesn't rip and get damaged. And you'll probably also want to throw a little bit of grease around the rubber gasket before you reinstall the axle. For this project, we're using two different types of grease. We've got a high temp red grease and a moly grease. You're going to need for this entire project, both sides, 2 of these tubes of moly grease and 1 of the high temp grease. The high temp grease is only going to go on the wheel bearings. The moly grease we're going to use on these upper and lower bearings, as well as to pack the axle. So all that in there is going to be full of this moly grease, as well as these top and bottom ones. You only need the high temp stuff for the wheel bearings. Before we install the knuckle, we're going to want to put on our seals. So we've got the felt first, then the rubber, and then the split metal ring. Those are all going to go right behind the ball on the axle. Now that we got the knuckle all cleaned up and ready to get put back on, we've got to pack the bearings and get them in place. The easiest way to go about doing this is go ahead and grease the top bearing, lay it in place, and then we're going to hold the bottom bearing inside of the knuckle as we rotate this into place. Okay, now that we've got our seals back here, we can take our knuckle and our lower bearing. We've already put in our upper bearing. We're going to put our lower bearing into the race. We're going to set this knuckle right over the top and slide it around so that it captures that lower bearing. Just like that. From there, we can take our bottom cap. Make sure you've got your shims. You can slide it into the bearings. And it may take a little bit of maneuvering. But you'll feel it capture and kind of hold it in place. We'll do the same thing for the top. Make sure we got our shims on here. And just like that, slide it into our bearing. So we got the nuts and washers and cone washers in. We've got our shims in on the steering arm as well as that bottom plate. Now the next thing we want to do is test our preload. The preload for the turning angle, it needs to be somewhere between 6 and 13 pounds. I've got this little digital scale that I use, and we just put this around where the pivot point is for the steering. And as we pull on it, we're going to see if it'll show up on camera the weight of force that it takes to make that turn. And so as long as that is between 6 and 13 pounds, then we are in good shape. And it looks like it was right at 7. So that's what we ended up with, 7.1 pounds of force, which is right in spec. Got a couple of brackets that are going to go on the back side of all 3 of these, and it's going to hold it in place. So just got to be real careful to make sure that the metal and the rubber seal fit inside of this lip edge right here. And you want to make sure that those are tight in the inside the groove so that they seal off as this moves against the ball. And then this felt will go on, and then the bracket will hold it in place. So you can see the orientation of this outer bracket. It's got the curved lip on the outside and the raised lip on the inside. And you'll want to use your flat edge up here as a guide for the felt, because there's a flat edge on the felt as well as these brackets. One goes on the top half, bottom half, and you can also get an idea for orientation with these two bolts that are right next to each other. Next, our axle will go back in. It goes in just like it came out. Have to wiggle it around a little bit to find the right spot. But those flat spots should be on the top and bottom whenever you go to put this back in. And there we have it. Next, we'll just fill this up full of moly grease. You can also verify that your axle is seated because it'll turn your differential whenever you turn the axle. So next we're going to put on a seal that has 3 flat edges, and those line up with the 3 flat edges on your spindle. So we're going to put that on first, then the spindle itself, and right in front of that is another gasket. And this one's just a round gasket with a cutout. That cutout is going to line up with this drain at the bottom of the spindle right down here. Here we've got a metal dust shield that goes on, just like so. And carefully we'll put on the dust plate. This dust plate has an orientation. Those flat sides go on the side. And then I can throw in a bolt or two to get this all cinched up. So there's our dust shield all installed, and we've got 40 foot-pounds on those bolts. Next up is rebuilding this hub. We've got a couple of hub bearings, inner and outer, and then a bearing seal. And so we're on the back side of the rotor right now. And we'll take out this bearing seal. Seal puller works best, but a pair of fencing pliers also will work. So there goes the old seal. Pretty well trashed. And then we've got our first bearing, which we'll be replacing. And the race is right there. We've got another one on the other side. And we'll knock that out just like we did on the axle tube. So we're looking for this notch right here, and there's one on the other side. This will allow us to alternate back and forth in order to get it out. Alright, I got that bottom one. So flip it over. And we'll do the same thing for this one. Find our grooves and there she goes. There's the other race. Alright, got the new race greased up and set into place. Also, because we like stopping, we cleaned off the rotor with some brake clean. Okay, we're going to take the old race and set it right on top. There's a fat edge and a skinny edge. We're going to use a fat edge so that in case it gets stuck in there, we'll have an edge that we can punch it out with. Looks like that got it. So what we're going to do next is flip it over. This one, that race is stuck, so we can flip it over. We have a little ledge in there now that we can put the punch on and knock it out. Gotta be very careful, don't hit the new race, but makes it pretty easy. The new race on this side, and we'll do the same thing with the old one. Just put it right on top of there, get it pushed in a little bit, and give it some taps. I think we have a winner. Okay, I'm gonna go back over here, clean up the lip a little bit, and we can put in that seal. Next up is the inner wheel bearing. Go right inside that race we just installed, and then on top of that will be the seal. And we got our trusty 2 1/8 socket. It'll fit right over the top of that. Help us drive that in fairly evenly. Check it with our finger and we are flush. Clean up this rotor one more time and then we can throw it onto the spindle. Pre-grease the spindle. We've got our hub all set up here and ready to go back on. And you'll feel it seat up on that lip. Now we are ready for the outer wheel bearing. Didn't show it on camera, but these are packed with grease, and I packed the hub with grease as well. That seat in. Now we're ready for a thrust washer and the adjusting nut and the locking nut. The thrust washer has a tab on the top of it and it lines up with the hole right here in the spindle. So we're just going to install that right here. And what that does is it puts pressure against the bearing. We're going to use this first nut as the adjusting nut in order to get it to the right amount of resistance. We're going to get to use that scale again, and we want to have some drag on the bearing and the wheel, but not too much, so we have the ability to adjust this with that. So we're just going to get it hand tight to start off with. Okay, so we're hand tight. Now we've got our locking washer that came in the kit. Throw that on here. That's going to go in between your adjusting nut and the lock nut. This one we want to get to around 50-55 pounds of torque. Test our drag and then adjust it from there. Check the spec, it's 58 pounds of torque on this outer nut. And then we want between 1 and 7 pounds of preload. I've got 7.5, so I'm going to back off that adjusting nut just a little bit, and we'll try it again. Readjusted that. I moved the adjusting nut maybe 1/8 of a turn, and it took me from 7.5 pounds up to 6 pounds. So that is right within spec and right where we need to be. Next item to do here is bend these tabs. So each of these tabs can fit around the nut. You want to pull one forward to lock in the locking nut, and you want to push one backwards to lock in the adjusting nut. Alright, we're in the home stretch here. Next up is going to be getting a gasket around the hub assembly and getting the locking hub installed. So there's a gasket, and it will line up with all these pins. And on the back side of the locking hub, there's an extra hole right here that lines up with the guide pin right there. Get our splines lined up on the axle. That should allow us to get this on there. There it goes. Next up is the snap ring. The end of the axle is threaded, so you can put a bolt in it and allows you to pull it out so that you got a little better access to getting the snap ring in here. There we go. Just like that, we can make sure that snap ring is in there and seated in the groove. Alright, next up is the hub lock. There's only one way it'll fit in here with all these grooves. There we go. There is a gasket that I put on in between the outer locking hub and the housing. And there's just these 10mm bolts to hold it in. Alright, our last step is going to be getting this caliper back on. We got the caliper reinstalled now. Went ahead and got this brake line hooked up. We've still got the brake line, the hard line that goes over the differential that we'll be putting on here in a second. And then we've got to connect our drag link to get the steering hooked back up. So that's a done deal. We got the knuckle all rebuilt. Got the diff fluid refilled. Both sides are done. All we gotta do now is bleed the brakes and go for a drive.